Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, good day. Have to try to a very broad salutation to the demographics of our group. My name is Herb. I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to our Tuesday night workshop on the steps, a personal application of the steps out of the big book. This call is being recorded. I'm going to put up the set aside prayer so that we can open up with a commitment to an open mind and an open heart. God, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and you, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, my brokenness, my spiritual path, and especially you. So finally, 4 months later, we're going to enter into step 2. Chapter 4, we agnostics, is built to follow step 1. Now, of course, it was built by Bill to follow step 1 in terms of the body and the mind problem, because those are the only things he discussed up till that point. I've introduced you to a new way of looking at step 1 that's legitimate in the big book, but we had to look at a piece of work in chapter 4 and a piece of work in chapter 5 to take a look at unmanageability as Bill presents it. Bill presents it, but not in the context of step 1. I was 10 years sober, given the set-aside prayer at that point, and introduced to a real understanding and an experience of step 1. Bill has this literary style of standing still for a minute and pausing when he goes into new territory. He looks back over his shoulder as he pauses. On page 44, in the preceding chapters, well, that would be the doctor's opinion, chapters 1, 2, and 3, because this is chapter 4. Chapter 1 is his story. Chapter 2, he wants to give us some hope. There is a solution. But he also wants to get very, very clear with us that alcohol is really a problem. So he gives us more about alcoholism. And now he's about to summarize it. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. For our purposes, the addict and the non-addict. Listen here, it's right here. There's only 2 components to addiction. Oh, there's lots of variations on a theme, and there's lots of consequences to addiction. Myriad, innumerable, actually. But there's only 2, according to the big book and Bill Wilson, components for addiction. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely. The mind problem. I can stop, but I can't stay stopped. Now notice he says or. He doesn't say and. I believe that's significant because it's not necessary to have both of these qualities. You might have one, you might have the other. If when drinking, you have little control, oh, that's the body problem. When I start, I cannot stop. You are probably an alcoholic. You are probably an addict if you have either one of those two components. Now, quite frankly, I have never met, with a lot of scrutiny and a lot of conversation, I have never met anybody that has just one. They may think they have one until we have a conversation, and maybe more than one, where we start looking at their actual history. And inevitably, they find that they have both. All I'm saying is Bill casts a very broad net here, either or. I think when we get really some experience in delving into our history and some honesty with ourselves, we see that we have both components. If in fact we're an addict, we might just have unhealthy habits, and that's worthwhile discovering in the sense of whether you're an addict or not. That's worthwhile knowing. And some people love the fellowship because of the group therapy. Some people love the fellowship because of the social components. Those people don't have to do this work in order to have a happy life. They just have to manage their unhealthy habits. So it's really important to know whether or not you have a death sentence, an addiction. An addiction is a death sentence. Oh, it's not the guillotine dropping all at once. No, no, no. Unfortunately, it's a very slow, tortuous death. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. Well, that's a huge leap. It's not even a logical leap, because he hasn't given us much information concerning other human resources. But it's the leap that he makes, and I'll just accept it. So this chapter is going to be about a spiritual experience. It's interesting that it starts out with the words we agnostics. He's really right in your face, addressing head on the problem of the God word. Even in 1939, there was a lot of negativity around the word. And today, oh my goodness, because of the unfortunate experiences that many people have had in their family of origin or with their religious tradition. It doesn't matter whether you're Buddhist or Taoist or Hindu, Muslim, Jew, Christian. I have had so many sad stories, tragic stories from people who have had a very distorted experience with organized religion. I'm not one of them. I started in grammar school, in kindergarten, Catholic schools, high school, college. As you know, I went through the seminary and the monastery, even graduate school was all Catholic, and I never once had a bad experience. Very unusual. It's just my life. It's just my history. It's just my experience. Many people ask, are you still a Catholic? My answer is, well, once you're a Catholic, you're always a Catholic. It's in your bones. It's in the marrow of it. It's your cellular structure. I mean, you've just absorbed it. I love the tradition. I love the history, the philosophy, the theology, the ritual, the rubrics, the liturgy. I love all of that. But I have a little problem as to how it's implemented. So I say my religion, my tradition is Catholicism, but I am not a traditional Catholic. And I have found the 12-step process is the formula that has allowed me to find what I was looking for. And that's where I've dedicated my life. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, okay, let's take a look at that. It's pretty simple. The words come from Greek. Both words come from a Greek word. The agnostic comes from gnosis. The G is silent, Gnosis, gnosis, which means knowledge. And when you put an A in front of it, it means no, not knowledge. So an agnostic says, I don't know whether there's a God. In fact, I doubt it. And by the way, it's not knowable. That's what an agnostic says. in contrast to an atheist, comes from the Greek word theos, which is a derivative of the word Zeus, the father of the Greek gods. They had a pantheon of gods, many gods, but Zeus was the main father figure of the gods. And the word developed into theos. And so when you put an A in front of theos, it means no God. So although a agnostic doubts and says it's doubtful, an atheist says absolutely not. There is only one reality. It's a measurable reality. It's material reality. There is no invisible. There is no immaterial. There is no spiritual. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience, spiritual experience, seems impossible. But to continue as he is means disaster, is the alcoholic, especially if he's an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. That's why we spent 4 months on it, to give you an experience with the body, an experience with the mind, that addiction, powerless, no choice, no decision, no choice. Addiction's a death sentence. Irrevocable, irretrievable, irredeemable. Hopeless. But we also looked at unmanageability in the same context under step 1, that our lives had become unmanageable. And we saw again, hopeless. My will on its own natural human willpower doesn't have the power to manage my life and reality. And that's not theory. That was the experience that we had when we looked at, with an open mind and heart, the bedevilments in relationship to our own personal history, even in abstinence. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. Bill gives us the fork in the road many times. Are you going to go to the left or are you going to go to the right? This is the road less traveled. This is a pre-selected group right here. We have 162 people on this call tonight. This is a pre-selected group. You already know that there's a lot of work, that there's assignments, that it's going to feel like school, and it's going to be a path of self-discovery with a lot of suffering because of that, and embarrassment. I have promised you that. Deflation of the ego at death does not sound like a walk in the tulips. And yet here you are, knowing that we're going to meet at least once a week. Some of you have joined us twice a week for a year. Who does that? Who does that? You do, all right? But here I am, and I'm sad to have to say this. 50% of you won't be here at the end of the 4th step. I'm very sad. It's my experience. Prove me wrong, please. The percentage of people who are participating has absolutely improved since we've gone on to Zoom. It may not be 50%. It was when we were meeting physically. Last year, we had a 20% improvement of the people that survived the rite of passage, as I call it. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. You're at the fork in the road. You can choose darkness, the path from which you have come, and you know very well the path of suffering, or you can choose light. Some of you have had an experience with it. I promise you a deeper and broader experience, and it's going to get very bright, but not very soon. Perhaps it isn't so difficult. About half of our original fellowship were exactly of that type, atheist or agnostic. So please, if you have any negativity, any resistance to the word God, hang in there. Yeah, we're praying the set-aside prayer because we're committed to a set-aside attitude. Release your death grip on your prejudice, or at least be willing to have your death grip released. At first, some of us have tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope. We were not true alcoholics, but after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life or else. And I had you write out, and we've discussed, are you convinced? That was the final assignment on step one. Are you convinced that your life lived on self-will will not be successful? If you've done that, you've probably had an experience like either a kind of a tepid, well, okay, I'm ready to go on, or maybe, oh my God, I'm screwed. That was part of your conversation. That's not in the big book. Perhaps it is going to be that way with you, but cheer up. Something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Our experience shows that you need not be discouraged. All right, so now I'm going to go to some of the slides to warm us up to where we've been from a picture standpoint. We've seen that we have a problem with the body and the mind. We've seen that we have a bigger problem with the spiritual malady, a problem of the will. Some people call it the spirit. I call it the will. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's the function in you that allows you to make a choice. And I'm emphasizing that because it's the key to steps 2 and 3. The will power, the power of choice, is the key to steps 2 and 3. It's the conundrum of step 1, not with regard to addiction. We've already seen that's a body-mind problem, but with regard to unmanageability. And it's a human problem, it's not an addict problem. 10 out of 10 humans, meaning 100%. We addicts are extreme examples of self-will run riot, Bill says. Extreme examples, meaning that the rest of the human race that aren't addicts are examples of. Again, I'm going to repeat this model with maybe a different picture because it's critical to step 1, but you've looked at that. And now it's going to be critical to step 2. It's going to break the code of step 2 for you and give a lot of depth and vibration to step 3. Not the body issue, but the mind issue and the will issue, the two things that make us specifically human. I have a body, but so does a carrot. So does a dog. What makes me different than vegetables and animals? I have an ability to know reflexively, and I have an ability to make a decision, a completely free decision. But we looked in unmanageability at our inability, our predisposition to no choice with regard to our willpower. Who am I as a human being? These are not rhetorical questions. Please take them seriously. Make some notes if you want to, and think about it between now and next week. Who am I as that human being? Really, seriously. Okay, I'm a finite material being. Absolutely. I have the characteristics of a rock. I have the characteristics of a carrot. I have the characteristics of a gorilla. I'm a finite material being. I have a body. And I have emotions in that body. but now I have a mind to know and a will to decide. There's lots of other models that will explain who we are. This keeps it pretty simple, and it really is going to help you, I believe, have a new experience with steps 2 and 3. Is God necessary? You've seen this diagram before, maybe. The Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo spent years on his back painting that ceiling in Rome. The hand that's reaching down from the right with the straight finger is the hand of God, the Creator, inviting human beings out of the earth, out of the dust, out of the dirt. The hand reaching up with not quite a straight finger is the designation of a human being. Genesis in the Hebrew scripture, that first book of the Torah, says God made humans in God's image and likeness. God made them man and female, male and female. God made humans. God made them in God's image and likeness. God made them male and female. Out of the earth, out of the dirt. In Aramaic, dirt, earth is Adam. Adam is not the name that the author of the poem in Genesis was giving to the species of human nature, human persons. Adam is earth or dirt. God made humans from earth or dirt. Well, here's the question we're asking now. Coming out of powerlessness, no choice in step 1, now we're asking in step 2, is God necessary? Well, Bill doesn't say God in step 2. Please pay attention. Bill scrubbed the big book, or attempted to, of religious words, vocabulary, and connotation. He wanted it to be neutralized so that people could approach it from any angle. Came to believe. I've asked you to look up that word, and that'll be crucial today. We'll look at that word. That a power greater than ourselves, there it is. That's step 2. A power greater than ourselves. Not higher than ourselves, not outside of ourselves, not other than ourselves. Please listen to the words. Bill was a wordsmith, paid real close attention to the words as I do, emulating his modeling of precision. Came to believe that a power, I don't know what that is, but he gave it a capital letter to signify that it's special, greater than ourselves, could restore us to sanity. All right, you've heard lots of stuff in meetings discussing sanity in step 2. Most of it's ignorant, and I'm sorry, I'm not judging it. Yes, I am. I'm judging it because it's unfortunate that people don't really understand the big book and the vocabulary in the big book. We looked at sanity and insanity in Jim's story on page 37. Bill gives us a definition of sanity and insanity. It comes from the Latin, as I mentioned then, and I'll re-mention now. It comes from the Latin sanus, S-A-N-U-S, which means health. And Bill uses it in the sense of obsession, an unhealthy mind. On page 37, whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity, a lack of proportion. a lack of the ability to think straight. That's all he means by that. He doesn't mean psychiatric or psychological. He just means that we have a vulnerability to an obsession, that thought that hijacks us. That's all it is. But that's what it is. And step 2 is a decision. Please pay attention. The big book doesn't say that as clearly as I do at this point. I'll show you where it does imply it. Today, I'll show you that. Step 2 is a decision. It's very clear about step 3. It's right in the step itself, made a decision to turn. Not so much in step 2. But stay with me. Step 2 is a decision about power. Step 3 is a decision for a relationship with power. Hear the difference. Step 2 is an invitation for you to have a concept. That's it. What is your concept? And I asked you to ask yourself that. That's the heart, the bullseye of the very first step 2 assignment. I asked you to ask yourself, what do you believe about God? Not what you've read, not what you think, not what you feel, not what you want, not what the parent said, not what the sponsor said, not what the ordained person said in your religious tradition. Nope. What do you? Last week, before we got into May, here we are now in May. But now, even today, what do you believe about God? Going back to the big book on page 44, if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, let's pause. What do we mean? Look at those words. Those aren't throwaway words. Code of morals. All right, that's a code that guides our will, our decisions. Morals, values, our code of ethics, our code of behavior. A better philosophy of life, very different. That's about knowledge. That's about philosophy. That's about knowing better. That's about your interpretation of reality and your theory about living. Again, Bill's catering to us as human beings in that model that I used of will and mind, code of morals connected to our will, better philosophy of life connected to our mind. Believe me, this is not a stretch. This is not bending Bill's and the big book's approach to fit my model or my philosophy. I tried to understand the big book, and it came out in this way that I'm understanding me as a human being so that I can understand the big book and the model of recovery. If this code of morals and better philosophy of life were sufficient, we would have recovered long ago. Oh my God, every one of us has bookshelves of self-help, of modes of behavior that promise freedom and enlightenment, modes of knowing that promise awakening and spiritual experiences, or at least satori, transcendence, whatever the words are in the various styles, page 45. But we have found that such codes and philosophies did not save us. I left the monastery in 1964 because I didn't find what I was looking for. I left psychology in 1969 because I didn't find what I was looking for. I continued with self-help all the way till I got to AA, and I figured it was another self-help program. I didn't find what I was looking for in self-help. And in the first 4 years of being in AA, I did not find what I was looking for. I was not looking for sobriety. I was not looking for freedom from alcohol. I found it. It was a gift. But for those first 4 years, I was restless, irritable, and discontent because I had not connected to the truth of a spiritual awakening. And that's why I'm so committed to this process with all of my waking moments in consciousness to try to help people find a connection to this methodology and this solution, because it's so simple and it's so effective. We could wish to be moral. I wanted to be a decent person. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. I wanted to know better. I have a deep thirst, a deep hunger that still drives me today in the best of senses, because I was converted from a seeker in 1988 to a finder. But I know there's more. We could will these things with all our might. Bill's making a transition here. I've shared this with you when we were looking at unmanageability. This is where Bill makes the transition from the body and the mind to will, to the willpower. The needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, body and mind perhaps, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. Lack of power is our dilemma. Lack of willpower. We had to find a power by which we could live, not deal with our addiction effectively, but deal with our unmanageability effectively. And it had to be a power greater than ourselves. That's in italics. Repeating step to itself. A power greater than ourselves. Obviously, but where and how are we going to find this power? This is the first of the second step questions in the big book. Pay attention now on page 45. Where and how are we going to find this power? Bill's going to meander in the next 10 pages in discussion and commentary, preparing us for his answer. He will give us an answer on page 55. We'll look at it deeply next week, be part of the assignment going forward. Not tonight, but know that he's set us up. He's keyed us up here. Teed us up, I guess they would say in the golf sport. Where and how are we going to find this power? Listen to his comment about the importance of that question. Well, that's what this book is about. Its main object, this book, is to enable me to find a power greater than myself, which will solve my problem. What's my problem? No, it's not my addiction. No, it's not my partner. No, it's not my parents. No, it's not my boss or my work. What's my problem? He asked us earlier. You might want to even draw a line in a box to it. That first full paragraph starts, lack of power is our dilemma. Lack of power is our dilemma, is our problem. That means we have written a book which will be spiritual as well as moral. Spiritual meaning talking about the world of spirit, the invisible world, the immaterial world, in contrast to moral, which means value. It's not a contrast moral to immoral. Moral comes from the Latin mores, M-O-R-E-S, which means value. It also could mean law. We're going to talk about God, and this is going to be the difficulty with agnostics, as he said. But in that next paragraph, he talks about doubt and prejudice. Prejudice, look at the word, prejudgment. I've got knowledge and I've got experience that I'm holding on to. And as I've mentioned to you from the Einstein quote and the whole approach to the set-aside attitude, the knowledge that I have and the experience that I've had up until the point of 1988, 1991, 1994, 2003, all 4 times that I worked the steps, were the potential impediments to prevent me from having any new knowledge or experience. And so it was brilliant of Bill on page 58, say we have to let go of our old ideas. Well, let me quote it. We beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. I'm talking to you right now who think that you have an adequate and effective relationship and concept of God and with God. To the extent that you hold on to your satisfaction, you're prevented from being taken to a place that you don't even know exists. I'm not saying throw anything away. I'm saying be willing to have it set aside. I'm not even asking you to set it aside. That's the nature of the prayer. We're inviting the Spirit to come in and set it aside. Open my heart, open my mind, so that I can have new information and a new experience. We were bothered with the thought, page 46, that faith and dependence upon power beyond ourselves was something weak, cowardly. Now, this is 1939. It might not be the same right now for you or even for our culture. There's been a lot of development, evolution, and sophistication with regard to people, primarily because of the spiritual leaders that have come over from the East that have challenged us with their traditions and with their beliefs and with their consciousness practices. Their emphasis is on consciousness. Our emphasis has been on rules. There's nothing wrong with rules. But we squeezed out consciousness back in the Middle Ages. We squeezed out consciousness out of our spiritual journey, and it became rote religion, and therefore it lost its soul. At least that's my interpretation of it. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it at all? Capital S, capital B. Pay attention to the initial capitals of words as you read the big book. I'm going to give you an assignment to reread chapter 4, this time with a different color highlighter, because I want to give you a question. The next assignment asks you to reread chapter 4 from the viewpoint of negative, from the lens of what do you disagree with? What do you resist? What word or phrase in chapter 4 brings up resistance in you? And then highlight that, or in some other way mark it. Bill tries to argue with us basically as a salesperson. Who made all this, he says, as he looks up at the starry night in awe and wonder. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. Please pay attention to that. Any God that I can understand is not an adequate God, because my mind is finite, and whatever it is that we're thinking about is greater than ourselves, by definition infinite, has no beginning and no end. You could look up the word. That's what infinite means, having no beginning and no end. And because we're finite, We can't even relate to that word. And we have no real adequate words, certainly, that would bring about understanding. And that's why Bill in this chapter says, it's okay to not understand or comprehend, fully defined. In fact, you're deluding yourself if you think you have an adequate concept of God in the sense of representing objective reality. It might be adequate and effective for you, and that's great. And that's going to be the whole point of the exercise on step 2. Much to our relief, page 46, we discovered we did not need to consider any other's conception of God. Here it is, please, not the big books. Bill is really opening up our whole panoramic vision here. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect a contact with God. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, now there's a synonym that was worthy of meditation. Creative intelligence. Oh, look at that. Intelligence, a function of the mind. Creative, a function of the will, a decision to take action. This is no accident, this model that I'm encouraging you to adopt. A spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things. Next week, we'll come into some very poetic, mystical conversations about unpacking that term. A spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things. If you want a little extra exercise, look up the word immanence. Look up the word transcendence. $100 words from theology that attempt to give us a sense of the awesomeness of this reality, this being, this it with a capital I. We began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction. Oh, look at that. Power and direction. Direction for my mind, guidance so that I know better. Power for my will so that I'm able to do what I know is better. Provided we take other simple steps. Okay, hold on. I wonder what he means by that. Step 2 and step 3 are a prelude to steps 4 through 7. Well, he said that, didn't he? Willing to go to any lengths? If you have decided you want, page 58, if you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to take certain steps. This is the warm up to step 3. So he's saying that step 3 is the commitment. There's no action in step 3. It's the commitment to steps 4 through 9. We began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. We found that God does not make too hard of terms with those who seek him. To us, the realm of spirit. There it is, capital R, capital S, another synonym. He is trying to give us many different ways of looking at this concept, this reality. To us, the realm of spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive. This is the magic silver bullet of the 12-step process, and especially of step 2. Never exclusive, never forbidding. To those who earnestly seek, to those who earnestly seek. When therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. Could he be any clearer? Not the big books, not Bill Wilson's, not the 12-step fellowship's conception, certainly not your sponsors. Your own conception. Do not let any prejudice deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. That's why the dictionary has been a real companion for me, and I'm inviting you to have the same experience. At the start, this will all we needed to commence, that means to begin spiritual growth, to effect our first conscious relationship with God as we understood God, as we understood it. All right? The only words I would change in the big book are those words, because I would say, as we don't understand it. But his intention here is to say, the way you think about it is good enough. Really seriously. Even your doubt, it's good enough. Afterward, he says, we find ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. We used our own conception, however limited it is. So here's the second of the second step questions on page 47. This is Bill's pedagogy. This is his style of teaching, asking questions and then unpacking it and giving us an answer. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question. I hope you're taking this literally. Bill is sitting in front of you saying, you need to ask yourself this question I'm about to give you. Do I now believe? Pause. Many of you are going, no, not yet. I mean, my God, we're only on page 47. We started on page 44. We're 3 pages into a 14-page chapter. No, I'm not convinced yet. Okay, he handles that because he knows 50% of the people are resisting because they're agnostic or atheist. He's already told us that. Do you now believe? Okay, so you have some resistance. He gives us an or. Oh my God, it's such a great strategy. Oh, you don't believe yet? Okay, are you willing to believe? That's not subtle. If you don't believe, are you willing to believe? Well, anybody who's had a first step experience, whether it's a mild experience with any of the 3 parts, you're realizing that there's some inadequacy in your life and in your power and in your approach to your addiction at the very least. There is some inadequacy. I've not been successful with my addiction, or I'm certainly not successful with my life. So, okay. I've done the self-help, I've done the religion, I've done the therapy, I've done all of the things that I've even done the 12-step program, and I'm still at loose ends with it all. I don't yet believe, but I'm willing to be open. I'm willing to be willing to be willing. It's a little remote, but yeah, kind of a little bit. There's a crack in my door, and a little bit of light is available to come in. That there is a power greater than myself. Bill then jumps on it. As soon as a person can say that you do believe or are willing to believe, we emphatically assure you that you're on your way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective structure can be built. For the very first time, Bill introduces an architectural structure here, a metaphor, analogy, I'm not sure which one it is, but a picture, a mental picture here of a spiritual arch through which we can walk to a new freedom. And he says this answer to this question, yes, I do believe, or yes, I'm reluctant, but I am willing, remotely, I'm willing. He said, that's the cornerstone. Obviously, the foundation has already been laid in Bill's mind here. That's step 1, the foundation. The deep excavation of powerlessness and the experience that we've had with that. And now we're laying on it a cornerstone, that first stone placed on the foundation that sets the direction of the entire arch. He mentions it again in step 3. He calls it the keystone, which is the stone at the top of the arch, which holds the arch together. He mentions it again, though, and for the last time, at the end of step 5. We've built the arch at the end of step 5, and we have now at the end of step 5, look at page 75, we've walked through the arch to a new freedom. At the end of step 5, the promises are there. Wonderful paragraph, poetically beautiful paragraph, mystical, actually. promises of walking through this spiritual arch at the end of the 5th step, this spiritual arch to freedom. Great news for us. We accept many things on faith which seem to be difficult to believe. I'm sure it will work if I only believe, but I cannot accept as true many of the articles of faith. Notice he's using terms that I've asked you to look up, faith and belief. We'll talk about that when I finish with my comments on the pages. Faith, belief, what do they mean? How are they different than trust? How are they different from one another, faith and belief? My dictionaries were not very helpful. I'm going to give you today, I believe, some definitions that will be extremely helpful. Besides a seeming inability to accept much on faith, we've often found ourselves handicapped by obstinacy, sensitiveness, unreasoning prejudice. That's why we have the set-aside attitude in prayer. Many of us have been so touchy, a casual reference to spiritual things, we bristle with antagonism, defensiveness. This sort of thinking has to be abandoned. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. Notice the set-aside attitude. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we were open-minded. You see, the option is death and darkness, or light and freedom. And when we really have that experience, we have an open mind and an open heart. Alcohol is a great persuader, he says. It beats us into a state of reasonableness. And so does reality when we look at the bedevilments and unmanageability. It beats us into a state of like, oh my God, I need help. I just can't do this on my own. He says it's a tedious process. I was 10 years sober, 2 spiritual awakenings, and yet those bedevilments were still technicolor in my life. Restless, irritable, and discontent. So he's going to give us a bunch of reasons now. He's going to give us facts. He's going to talk about science and electricity. He's going to talk about science and molecules on page 48, and the prosaic steel girder electrons. He was a dilettante at science, and it still makes sense to us on page 49. He's going to talk a little bit about poetry, an all-powerful, guiding, creative intelligence. Beautiful concept, poetic, mystical. He's trying now in his sales role, instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation. Beautiful concepts coming from, I believe, Pierre de Chardin's work at the turn of the century. The phenomenon of man, if you're interested. We agnostic and atheists choose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the alpha and omega that comes right out of Pierre de Chardin. The beginning and the end, rather vain of us at all. So he's going to now shame us and guilt us. Oh, Bill's a manipulator. We have to travel this. If we are traveling this path of doubt, he says here in the next paragraph, we beg of you to lay aside prejudice. So now he's down on his knees saying, please open up your mind and heart. Look at the faiths. Now he's going to appeal to evidence. 80% of the world's population believes in some kind of faith. Don't you see they have stability, happiness, and usefulness? His salesmanship again. Page 50. We never gave the spiritual side a fair hearing. Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these matters, for our purpose, we need not be worried. They are questions for each individual to settle for himself. Boy, I hope you're hearing the theme here. On one proposition, however, everybody's agreed. Everybody seems to believe that they have gained an access to and believe in a power greater than themselves, this power in each case accomplished the miracle. They flatly declared that since they have come to believe, that's the second step, isn't it? Came to believe. Do you hear the process there? See, this is not a light switch. This is a dimmer switch. Came to believe. I was 10 years sober, thinking that I had done steps 2 and 3 because I did it on the basis of my religious tradition. All my thoughts and my feelings up to that point, all my vocabulary, all my words were all coming from my religious tradition. And later on, after I finished the work that third time in 10 years of sobriety, I realized that my concept of God was the very impediment to my relationship with the mystery. It's powerful. All my theology, all my understanding was the very thing that got in my way. They flatly declared that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude toward that power. You'll see he talks about attitude in step 2. We'll see it next week. And do certain simple things, steps 4 through 9. There has been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. Thinking of the mind, living of the will. Spiritual awakening, a change in the way we think and feel and behave, and it's done to us, not by us, but not without us. I introduced that in the second meeting that we had in January. Appendix 2. He refers to it a couple times in this chapter. To go back to it, take a look at it. In the face of collapse and despair, step 1. In the face of total failure of our human resources, unmanageability, they found that a new power, peace, and happiness and sense of direction flowed into them. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. I wonder what that means. In my wondering, I came to a conclusion based on my experience. It means that I finished step 9. Do you notice he says wholeheartedly, to the best of my ability, met a few simple requirements, not suggestions here. If you want a spiritual awakening, these are the requirements that you take these actions. Once confused and baffled, I'm on page 51. The seeming futility of existence, they show the underlying reasons why they were making heavy going. Leaving aside the drink question, hello, addiction's not the problem. They tell us why living was so unsatisfactory. Unmanageability is the problem. They show how the change came over them when hundreds of people, now thousands, now hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people actually, are able to say the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important fact of their lives. Completely confirming what he says in Appendix 2. Read it again, it's a page and a half. Awareness of the presence of God is the essence of a spiritual experience. Awareness. Awareness is the conscious contact. Step 2 is a confirmation that we're in constant contact. Step 2 is an invitation to become conscious of that contact. Step 3 is an invitation to turn that conscious contact into a relationship. And steps 4 through 9 are the steps that remove the obstacles to that relationship. Step 10 continues removing those obstacles to that relationship. And step 11 is sitting in meditation to improve that conscious contact. Oh my God, that's how it works. Again, though, he's going to go back to some cajoling here. We're fettered by superstition, tradition, and all sorts of fixed ideas. He talks about Columbus and Galileo. Perhaps in our discussion, we'll talk about Columbus and Galileo and what it means here. I'm not going to take our time to do that right now. But fettered, he's got a great command of the English language. Maybe some of you looked it up. When I looked it up, in a dictionary that gave me a little bit of historical background. It said a fetter is an ankle chain in a Spanish dungeon. That's pretty graphic. Fettered by our presuppositions, by our prejudices, by our knowledge and our experience that we're too attached to and that prevent us from seeing the truth. It says, aren't some of us as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the spirit as people were about Columbus' time? The world is flat, therefore I can't sail out and discover the truth. When I believe a lie, I can't discover the truth. And the Wright brothers, you can't fly. Birds can fly, but people can't fly. At the same time, the Wright brothers were at Kitty Hawk flying their plane. There was a PhD astrophysicist in Washington delivering a paper saying man will never be able to have a flight in an airplane. At the very same time. Amazing stuff. So we looked at page 52, of course. The bedevilments. We're not going to take a look at that again. The next paragraph says, a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe. We had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas did not work, but the God idea did. Notice his subtle word game here. Our ideas about God don't work, but the reality of God does. The God idea, not our idea of God. Pay attention to the words and the use of them. He's not saying the idea of God or our idea of God. He's saying the reality of it, whatever it is. On page 53. And we'll end with this page. We're given the power to reason, to examine evidence of our senses and to draw conclusions. That's the function of the mind. This is one of man's magnificent attributes. Why we think more sane and logical to believe than not to believe, why we say our former thinking was soft and mushy when we threw up our hands in doubt, that agnostic, that atheist, we don't know. Here it is. I'm bringing it home, kids. Pay particular attention. This is the whole point of tonight. When we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis, we could not postpone or evade step one. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or God is nothing. Binary. This mystery that we're looking at, this infinite spiritual reality, has no beginning and has no end. I don't understand what it means, but if there is this reality, that's what it means. Is everything or there is no God. And then he says, God either is or isn't. Here it is. The next question, the third question in the second step. What is your choice? Oh my God. We spent 4 months looking at no choice. No choice in the body, no choice in the mind, and actually no choice in our will. And now he is saying we have to use our will to make a choice. And so I'm saying here, interpreting Bill's invitation, we're not making a decision about our addiction, and we're not making a decision about our life. We're making a decision about God or no God, the proper use of the will, as he says in step 10. God either is or God isn't. What is your choice? I'm going to stop with this next line. Arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. And I had to stop. 1994. I had been asked the question that you were asked. What do I believe? I was then asked that second question, which is in the next assignment for you going forward. And I'll review it again before we leave tonight. And that is, I hope you've written out what it is you believe. Now I want you to write out an answer to this question. How do you behave in light of what you believe you believe? I didn't just stutter. How do you behave in light of what you believe you believe? Because that's what you wrote. Now you're going to write out how you behave. Arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. And I had to ask myself, so what is faith? What is faith? What is this God? Or is it healthy steps? Is it higher self? Is it human spirit? Is it the Holy Spirit? What are the words that I want to use? What is the life force that brings this acorn to that oak tree? Dr. Alan Berger, if you were on the workshop with us on Saturday, introduced the concept of an organismic life force. I love that concept. An organismic life force. That acorn doesn't need to be trained to become an oak tree. When you plant it in the ground and the circumstances are favorable, it will become a sapling, and then it'll become that oak tree on its own. Bill asks us the question in step 2, a decision about my concept. What is faith? I looked it up in the dictionary, faith and belief and trust. And my dictionary, unfortunately, was very inadequate. I used more than one. Some of them were a little bit more adequate, but it said faith is belief. And then I looked up belief and it said belief is trust. And I looked up the word trust and it said trust is faith and belief. I went in a complete circle. Bill says faith, we're confronting right now. I'm asking you to confront it. He said willingness on page 47. That's the cornerstone. I hope you're looking at the PowerPoints because I'm now progressively going to take you through something that's a little complicated, and it really is important for you to pay attention to the words as well as the PowerPoint, because I'm going to unpack an approach to step 2 that changed my life. What is faith? Is faith a function of the body, an emotion? If I feel God is present, God is present. Is faith a function of the mind? If I know and think and describe God, I'll have some certitude about it. Is faith a function of the will? I make decisions. What is faith? Those are the 3 components of the human being I stressed today, as I've stressed all the time we've been together. Well, no, it's not a function of the mind. Faith, by definition, is the acceptance of that for which there is no evidence. There's no certitude with faith. It's not about knowledge. Faith is, in fact, diametrically opposed to science of the mind. Is it a feeling of the body? Well, if I feel God's presence is if I don't feel God's presence, well, that doesn't even make any sense. If you're logical, poets and mystics might have some different responses, but if you're logical, it's not about feeling emotions that emerge out of the body. Well, what is faith then? Bill gave us the hint on page 47. Are you willing to believe? It wasn't as clear there. And now on page 53, he said God is or God isn't. What is your choice? Oh, wow. Faith is a decision. Faith is merely my decision. God is. And then when my mind says, well, it's a pretty good idea, Because if it isn't real, I'm screwed based on my first step experience. So my mind accepts that decision, and that's my belief, the acceptance of the faith decision. And my body says, well, now I'm going to put it into action. And my behavior and action based on my belief and based on my faith is my trust. I'll go over that again next week because it's such an important concept. This is how I came to believe in step 2, that faith is empty. It's invisible. There's no substance. It's thin. It's dark. There's no reality to faith. It's merely this empty decision God is. And then I base my life on it. It's the gambler's decision. I'm making a decision with all the hope that it's real. Because I'm in the bondage of the addiction, and I'm in the bondage of self, unmanageability, and I want freedom. I want freedom. Now, I still don't have freedom here because I'm looking through the bars, but step 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 are going to take care of that. But right now, I want to know, is God necessary? That's up to you. It's your decision. This is step 2, came to believe, a process. A process of a decision. A process of a decision about my concept. What is your concept? That's the question. What do you want and need? And please do not answer it. Hold the question. What do you want and need as qualities and attributes? What do you want and need as qualities and attributes? At this time in your life, what do you need and want as qualities? I'm looking at the assignments now. Assignment 7. Read and highlight. After you answer the question, how do you behave, in light of your first answer about what you believe, then reread chapter 4, highlighting the negative, highlighting the resistance, highlighting the doubt. Next week, we'll cover pages 53 to 55. They're every bit as dense as, at least I hope you have a sense of my approach to the material that we looked at tonight. And I didn't even unpack some of it. I thought maybe we'd do that as we're talking about your perceptions, your highlights up through page 53. And perhaps your dictionary work and your review of faith and belief and trust in terms of definitions and anything else that struck you. I hope that was helpful. As I say, it was the key that unlocked the door to both steps 2 and 3. Step 2 is a decision of my will about God, about this power. And it changes as I do. Gandhi said that. Our concept of God will change as we do. And it's changed. For 5 years, in the last 5 years, I was using the term mystery. In the last year, I've used the term flow with a capital F. And we'll talk more about that as we unpack both your knowledge, your experience, and your questions. We can bring it to closure with the serenity prayer for right now. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change.
Things I cannot change.
Courage to change the things I can. And wisdom to know the difference. Wonderful session, and we're not done by any stretch. We have just opened the can of worms, by the way.